Good evening. My name is Marsha Ellison. I'm president of the Fort Lauderdale Broward branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Want to certainly welcome everyone to what we're calling NAACP Unmuted, Episode 1. We will attempt to have a monthly town hall meeting bringing forth issues that certainly involve our community, NAACP, and an effort to tell our own story. We can't complain about folk not telling our story if we don't tell it ourselves. So that is where we are this evening. I want to open up this evening with our prayer, as we do in the NAACP. Our Minister Edwards, our Religious Affairs Chair, it's Wednesday is her night. So that duty falls to Judge Ilona Holmes. And Judge Holmes, if you will take us to the throne of grace.
Thank you, Madam President. Let us pray. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for our lives. We thank you for health, and we thank you for our strength. God, we thank you for those that are present on this town hall tonight. God, because you said without a vision, the people perish, and without knowledge, the people perish. And God, I ask you now to let this be edifying to all who are listening. And then you just told us in your word to write the vision and make it plain. And those that read it will run with it. So those that can't be with us tonight, God, we ask you that those who are listening will carry the word about the victory that you've given us, and we consider it a blessing. And God, we just look to you for more blessings as we go forward in this struggle to have your people vote. And then God, those that are sick among us tonight, we ask you for your healing. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Thank you, God. Amen.
Amen.
We will now move to our introductions. We'll start with our leader, our president of the NAACP Florida State Conference, our National Board of Directors, and Broward County. Now, she got some other memberships, but I don't really care about those. Life member of the Fort Lauderdale Broward branch of the NAACP, our own Dr. Adora Obianweze. I want folks to know there's a couple things. She's given up her time on her birthday to be with us. This issue is so important. She also just know that this train does not move unless the president says so. We have, litigation, and we're calling Pamela, but one of the first things that Pamela Burch Fort does is contact our president and say, here's a fight. Do you want to get in it? Y'all see, we here. So without further ado, our own state president, national board member, Dr. Adora Obianweze. Madam President, you have the floor. You're muted, Madam President. Need to unmute.
That would help, right? Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam President. I just want you to know I'm delighted, always delighted, to spend time with the Fort Lauderdale Broward branch, always, always. And I just admire the branch so much and the work that you do, each of you do, as well as groups of you doing. So we know that you are really, really focused on a very, very, very higher number of memberships than you have. And I know that this is not the subject for tonight, but there's no way that you can put a microphone and we not discuss memberships. So I want to commend you for the numbers that you have really accosted, and I use that word a little harshly because I wanted to use it. You're making sure that folks give you that money for those memberships. Now, you didn't bother to tell the people that in the Fort Lauderdale Broward branch, I have 2 life memberships. And so I tell you, I'm very proud of that. And I intend to keep right on providing donations to the Fort Lauderdale branch. It's Broward Fort Lauderdale branch. So I tonight, as we face this subject, and those who know me, know that I wake up, when God wakes me up every morning, I wake up with 2 things on my mind. Thank you, Lord. And is there a fight today that I can get into? So, so I want you all to know that I've been waiting for this fight. And we finally got one that we can wrap our arms around and talk about and really get people to see what the NAACP does. And I think we ought to be proud of the work that we're doing. So thank you, everybody. And let's get started. Madam President,
Thank you,
thank
Madam.
you so much.
I
So
think, to my knowledge, the best singer around here is Judge. We're gonna have to call you to sing happy birthday. There's one thing about Zoom; it doesn't work too well when everybody sings. So
I thought Deke was gonna give me a suitable key. Okay.
yeah, we don't want that. That's what's wrong
All
right
right,
there.
here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Madam President. Happy birthday to you and many more.
I thank you, I do. I thank you, I do. I thank you, everybody. I thank you, I do.
Yes.
Oh, look like we got a little competition around here with the pipes now. A little competition around here. Okay, Madam President. Okay, well, automatically the birthday girl wins. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our own. And I recognize that we have NAACP is from all over the state, but for tonight, Broward County is claiming her. We may have to do like a custody agreement or something for Miss Pamela Burch Fort. But I'm file. We've already filed our papers, Madam President. Our legislative
Right.
strategic specialist. She is our consultant. She is our extraordinaire. And so whenever when something's on the horizon, we're looking for somebody who knows and the details, somebody who's on the hill, that's on up in the Capitol every day for us. So says the people that are there, so says the legislators, and they actually call her to say, what does the NAACP think? She knows because she's consulted with the president however many times, it may be daily, it may be multiple times, to make sure where we are. So we are well represented with Miss Pamela Burch Fort. So Pamela, if you will take it away.
Thank you so much, President Enrique and President Ellison, and to Judge Holmes and Tony Brown, the President in Indian River County. Thank you all for being here, and to the audience that we have this evening. This is a very good discussion for us to have. The NAACP has been on the vanguard of voter registration and get out the vote issues since the beginning of time. And I am so pleased that Madam President allowed the conference to get into this fight. It was indeed a fight worth having. But just by way of background here, Senate Bill 90, a bill that was enacted during the 2021 legislative session, and it was enacted largely along party lines. It was one of several voting laws passed throughout the United States. These voting laws were known as Jim Crow 2.0, simply because of their very restrictive voting suppression measures, which are reflective of days of old. Senate Bill 90 did several things. It restricted the use of drop boxes. It required them only in certain places and at certain times, and required the supervisors of elections employees to monitor each drop box rather than electronic surveillance. It limited ballot harvesting, meaning that a voter was allowed only to possess 2 ballots that was not their own ballot or the ballot of a family member. It required additional identifying information to request a vote by mail ballot. You had to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number or the last 4 digits of your driver's license. It limited the request for vote by mail ballots to a life of 2 years as opposed to a life of 4 years. It severely impacted line warming, and that is the ability to assist voters who are in line to vote, providing them food and water, comfort, chairs, and other comfort items. It required a verbal disclaimer to a prospective voter that the voter registration form may not be turned in on time. And it required the voter registration forms to be submitted to the Division of Elections or to the county where the prospective voter resides, rather than where the prospective voter signed the form. So after nearly a 2-week trial, 42 witnesses, including Indian River County Branch President Tony Brown and Volusia County Branch President Cynthia Slater, both testified in the trial. But after 42 witnesses and reams of reports and records, Senate Bill 90 was largely struck down by federal Judge Walker in a blistering 288-page order. He indicated that this bill came about because of Florida's grotesque history of voter suppression attacks on Blacks. And I'm going to turn it over to Judge Holmes, who's going to talk about that extraordinary 288-page order. And I know that Judge Holmes loves to read judicial orders.
I do.
One she needed to lay down and rest about before she could tackle it. Judge Holmes.
Well, thank you, Ms. Fort.
And let me just say this: Judge Holmes is retired, so don't nobody panic. It's gonna be all right. But she is serving as our general counsel for the Fort Lauderdale Broward NAACP and criminal justice chair. And no, she doesn't sleep much because every time I think of something, I call. And then she has certainly volunteered her time as we go on with different lawsuits or litigation that we have to provide expert information and direction for us. So with that, Judge Holmes.
All right, thank you, President Ellison. It's my pleasure to serve this NAACP. Given the history that Judge Walker is the chief federal district court judge in the Northern District of Florida. Florida is broken up into 3 judicial districts federally. The Northern District, that's in the Tallahassee area, the Middle District, which is the Orlando area, and then the Southern District, which is down here with us, Fort Lauderdale. It goes from Fort Pierce down to Key West for the Southern District. But voting issues always wind up and they're mandated to be heard in Tallahassee. So that's why Chief Judge Walker had this opinion or issued this opinion and had the case. Some people refer to him derogatorily. I think they're trying to hurt his feelings. They call him the Obama judge because he was appointed by President Obama. But this man doesn't rely on his political party or who appointed him. From reading his opinion, he went back 20 years to show the history of voter suppression for people that look like us, for Black people in this state. I was commenting to President Ellison earlier and also to Mr. Brown. I don't think it would have been the same result if the NAACP weren't a part of this litigation, and I'll tell you why. Judge Walker had statistics that dealt with white people, Black people, and Hispanics. He generically, and I'm using his terminology, and the issues that rose under Senate Bill 90 that Ms. Fort just went through, he could pinpoint almost to the number that those were things like the drop box, the registration return provision, and we'll go into that, and I'm trying not to sound like a lawyer, and then the solicitation, and we'll talk about that in a minute. All of those things to a T were things that Black people did and relied upon, more so than white people and Hispanic people. And so the judge was very meticulous. If you have the time, go, you can download the opinion. It's 288 pages. And he even gives his history growing up in the middle part of Florida and seeing for himself the voter suppression tactics used to keep Black people from voting. But Judge Walker starts off this way. He says, Florida has a horrendous history of racial discrimination in voting. He made that very clear. And then he went to town talking about the testimony Ms. Fort gave you, all the things, all the evidence, the 42 witnesses, the 2 weeks of trial, and he entered that comprehensive order. So the first thing he did, he tackled basically that what's really, really important to us is the Dropbox issue. Black people, we work, and it was found that we're in the social, the service industry. I wanted to say the social service, but it's the service industry, and therefore the hours aren't flexible. And it's, takes, you can't take a day off and go vote. So you would ask for a voter ballot, vote by mail ballot, and then you would drop it off in one of those drop boxes. Our very own supervisor of elections in Broward County testified during the hearing, during the trial, that he was going to limit the drop boxes because of Senate Bill 90. He was going to limit those to 8 boxes in the 2 days before the election or before early voting ended. But if we didn't have Senate Bill 90, he was going to have 40 boxes, 40 drop boxes. So it had an effect, and many of the supervisors of elections that testified talked about the number of boxes that they were going to limit, and that is a hindrance to Black people, putting their ballot in the drop box and thinking that their vote's going to count, because Senate Bill 90 was targeted at us because we used the drop box more so in 2020. But I will tell you this, to be fair, white people used the drop box more in 2020 than any race of people. Okay, they had the largest numbers, but we were just a few percentage points behind them for the first time ever in using those drop boxes. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it, but we used it, and your statistics show that we're going to continue to use it because it's convenient. Okay, people can't get to the polls because of transportation, getting days off, and childcare issues, but they can get those ballots, and on their way home from work, they can drop it in a drop box that's maybe close to their job. So the legislature targeted the drop boxes. And so they can limit the number of drop boxes, that limits the number of ballots that get cast, because a lot of people can't vote in person because they got to go to work. The employers don't give them the time off. And then the registration returned, and Ms. Fort hit it on the head. The NAACP, the fraternities, the Divine Nine, and churches would qualify as the third-party voter registration organizations. And for them to have to tell people, okay, you're registering, but this has to be turned in 48 hours, and you may not be registered to vote if it's not turned in. And then there was the penalty. Ms. Ford, I read that twice. It starts off with $50 for every wrong ballot. And they changed some of the language because they really wanted everybody that was signing people up to vote, they wanted them to sign a sworn affidavit and give their name and their address. I guess it'd make it easy for them to come pick you up and arrest you if they found some irregularity. And then $100 fine, it would go up depending on the number that you turned in. It used to be, we get your registration, we get you all signed up, and then we just turn it into the supervisor of elections. You can't do that anymore under Senate Bill 90 because they wanted you to send it to the county in which the person lived. So it was just a bar, a way to keep Black people from voting. Because if you're outside for instance, the NAACP office, and people are walking by and they're visiting family members, but they're not registered to vote. We got a registration going on, and they live in St. Lucie County, for instance. I'll take your county, Mr. Brown. And we just sign them up. It used to be we could send that to our supervisor of election and it goes to the right place. But now under Senate Bill 90, and I can't say now, but under Senate Bill 90, that would have posed a lot of problems. And then the solicitation. Solicitation, there's a Florida statute that prohibits, that it makes unlawful, illegal for you to walk up to somebody while they're waiting in line to go vote and say, can I help you with your ballot and vote? You know who to vote for. That's illegal. That's already against the law. And so we didn't need any further law to tell that we can't just go up and assist them. But what they did was they stretched it in Senate Bill 90 by saying, okay, if you give them a bottle of water, you're basically telling them who to vote for. I don't know who in the world can I walk up to and I give them a bottle of water that they'll know that I'm telling them to vote for a specific candidate. Okay. And so that made no sense at all. And like I said, many of the branches and the units of the NAACP give out water and snacks and ponchos, umbrellas, folding chairs, because, to suppress our vote, they have, made it so bad. They put 2 machines in one polling place so that you got to wait in line. They say on the average of about half an hour to 3 hours to vote. And a lot of people give up when you have to wait that long. A lot of people don't even want to wait on the Lord, much less wait to vote. And so they said that we were in some way soliciting and telling them how to vote by giving them those things. So they made that illegal. And Judge Walker made a point of saying, in the Black culture, voting is sort of like a community thing. We're communal out there. It's like a family reunion. We're having a good time. There's music and we're passing out food just so that people will feel comfortable while waiting to go and vote. And so this legislature in 2021 decided to make that unlawful and illegal. Okay, even though there's a statute that says you can't walk up to somebody and ask them, you need my help. Okay, we're not asking for help. We're giving people. In Florida, it's a necessity. You cannot stand in line in that hot sun and not pass out without getting somebody giving you some water. It's like being in a desert, the Sahara Desert. So things that Black people tend to do is what the legislature really horned in on. There was no voting fraud. None was. I mean, they were all on TV. And after the 2020 election saying how wonderful Florida, our results were in on time. There was no hanging chads. There was no indication of any fraud whatsoever. And this is according to Judge Walker. And yet they horned in by saying, how can we stop the Black people? And they had text messages from, the Republican Party and state senators in this state saying that, we can't make that up. The Black people are voting. And so this was their way to stop us. It was pure and it was simple. But they seem to have this in for Black people and to keep us from voting. So Dr. King said, and I'll just pass it because I want to segue into what's happening now, but Judge Walker, before I quote Dr. King and pass it back, Judge Walker found that number one, the restrictions on the drop boxes was unconstitutional. It denied access to the ballot. And he cited the 14th Amendment, First Amendment. And so that's unconstitutional and out. The registration return provision that really targets the third-party voter registration organizations such as the NAACP and churches and fraternities and sororities, that's unconstitutional. That prohibition and citing the disclaimers, even though the people, the lawyers involved, they all agreed that a new bill, Senate Bill 524, that Ms. Ford is going to talk about, got rid of the disclaimer and for the third party people. So they were like, they knew in advance that what they had done was wrong, but they weren't going to concede the point. And so that's out, but it was still in Senate Bill 90 that we had to change the way that we operated. All right. And Mr. Brown in his testimony before Judge Walker said that, there are three things that the NAACP does, and that's register people to vote. Then we educate people, and then we encourage them to vote. So you can't get around that by passing legislation that will stop our people from voting. So that was declared unconstitutional. And then handing somebody a bottle of water, giving them a chair, giving them a fan, giving them a poncho so they don't pass out and die trying to vote. That has been proven to be unconstitutional. Judge Walker declared that part of the expansion of the solicitation. He says there's already a statute that covers, trying to get people to vote a certain way. And the legislature could not show that by giving somebody water or snacks or something while they're waiting in line to vote, it would just help us if they gave us more polling places. Okay, but in our neighborhoods, you got to go a little ways, you got to walk somewhere, and then they put 2 or 3 machines in there that don't work at all. So we're going to wait in line, even if there's one machine. So we are not prohibited now, NAACP and Divine Nine, from handing out water and things like that to help our people. Mr. Brown, I thank you for letting me use you. And then, and I'll leave and say what Judge Walker said, and then we'll go to Senate Bill 524. Judge Walker quoted Dr. King. Dr. King said, denying Black people the right to vote is like telling a Christian that they are not allowed to pray. So y'all think about that. And then, remember the relevance of the NAACP, because we were the lone Black organization in this litigation, making that argument that it was racially discriminatory. And we were specific as to our people. And even though when a law gets passed, it's for all the people, but sometimes these laws have unequal results to people who look like you and me. So I'm very proud to be a part of the NAACP. I'm proud of my state president. I'm very proud of my local unit president, and we're going to stay in the fight. However, the legislature, they do not sleep. Evil people don't sleep. I think that's biblical. They devise ways. So they came up with Senate Bill 524. Ms. Fort, what's the good news about 524?
Well, Judge, there just is not any good news anywhere about voting. But before we move to 524, I want to say one other major thing that happened in this order by Judge Walker is that he placed the entire state under pre-clearance. Now, that's a word that many of you probably have heard before. It was in the context of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And as part of Florida's history, we had 5 counties that had to get permission from the federal government before they could engage and enact certain voting processes in those counties.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to end on that, Pamela. He retained jurisdiction for 10 years.
10 years.
And he told the legislature, if you're going to pass some laws regarding drop boxes, solicitation, and voter registration, you got to clear it through me first. So I asked God to give him long life.
That's exactly correct. That is a very little used provision of the Voting Rights Act. And it was extraordinary to see Judge Walker invoke that provision. And this case was going to be very difficult for us to win, is the way we went into it, because attempting to prove intentional discrimination can be very difficult. We were in this litigation, and the most significant part of it was the testimony yielded by our own members. Tony Brown and Cynthia Slater did an extraordinary job of discussing exactly what the NAACP does to educate, how they educate, when they educate, how they engage voters in the Souls to the Polls activities to ensure and encourage that they vote. So that testimony was very critical to the success of this litigation. Mr. Brown and I had some very interesting conversations as we moved through the preparation for this trial. And as part of that preparation, President Ellison and President Lewis in Hillsborough County both gave their time to discuss line warming activities in their counties. Line warming is something we universally do, but it's very different in the various counties. But Mr. Brown was able to talk about the NAACP in a very, very poignant and specific way. When he and I had our conversation, I was explaining, now you're going to be testifying, and the judge is white. All of the government attorneys are white, and they don't know all the details about voting in your community. So you're going to have to go into the courtroom and deliver a narrative. Just tell a story. Just talk as if you're talking to your family and explaining how we do what we do, and do it with conviction and passion. And that is exactly what Mr. Brown did. And he did an extraordinary job, and I want to thank him for that. And we might need him again because, yes, as Judge Holmes says, the legislature does not sleep. While we were waiting for Judge Walker's decision from the bill passed in 2021, the legislature was hard at work passing yet another heinous and onerous voter suppression measure. This provision creates the Office of Election Crimes and Security within the Department of State. And today, the state attorney, your sheriffs, your police, the Division of Elections, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, all of those entities can currently investigate an election irregularity, including the Florida State Elections Commission. So we already had investigative units, but the governor wanted yet a separate unit within the Department of State that could investigate election law violations and something called election irregularities, which the definition of an irregularity is not provided in the act. So it could be virtually anything. And there will be special election officers within the regional office of each Florida Department of Law Enforcement regional office around the state. So that's a lot of people that can investigate election law violations and what they call irregularities. The Department of State, of course, has to report annually who they were investigating and the outcome of that investigation. A provision that really could have an impact on the NAACP is an increase in fines for failing to turn the voter registration forms in timely. You were given 14 days to do this, but this provision will increase from an annual cap of $1,000 to an annual cap of $50,000. So each time you fail to get the forms in on time, it's going to cost in excess of $1,000 up to $50,000. It increases the frequency with which the supervisor of elections has to engage in list maintenance. Currently, in odd years, the supervisor reviews the voter rolls and removes individuals who may be deceased, individuals who may have left the county, individuals that may have been convicted of a felony. So it's a cleansing of the list. And we've had such chaotic and disastrous attempts to do voter purges and voter roll list maintenance, because people who should be legally and eligibly registered to vote are oftentimes removed from the list for one reason or another. So it can be a confusing and chaotic time. So rather than do it every other year, we'll be list cleaning every year. It requires inactive voters to confirm their permanent address before they can be placed back on the voter rolls. It actually changes the name of drop boxes to secure ballot intake station. So now our drop boxes have been elevated to a very sophisticated level. So we should all feel good about putting our ballot in a secure ballot intake station. It transfers this disclaimer that Senate Bill 90 required, this verbal disclaimer that your forms may not get to the Division of Elections on time or the Supervisor of Elections on time. It transfers the verbal to a written disclaimer. And this provision in 524 did have an impact on what Judge Walker decided to do with the verbal disclaimer. So this bill, I guess one other major provision is that it increases the number of days that you have to request supervised voting. In nursing homes and assisted living homes, the administrator has the ability to ask the local supervisor of elections to come in and assist with voting patients and clients in those facilities. Today, it is 21 days before the election. Now it's 28 days before the election. So all of those things have to be done sooner. But again, this bill really will have an impact on supervisors of elections. They oppose many of the provisions in this bill, as they did Senate Bill 90. And we have had supervisors of elections to say that they are just going to give up their jobs, that they have not been able to impress on this legislature that they do have the skills and the know-how to administer an election, and did not need the micromanaging of the legislature. So that's where we are now, Judge Holmes. And I know that there are groups, reviewing this law to see whether we have constitutional or statutory or procedural challenges.
But one good thing with the Office of Election Integrity, they don't have arrest authority. They're just investigators.
That is correct.
The governor wanted them to be able to arrest. And what the problem with that is, we know where they're going to be stationed. When he said we're going to put them in regional places, they're going to be over where the Black people vote. Yeah. And the first time they think they see an irregularity, the governor wanted them to have the power to arrest and take you right out of the voting poll. But the legislature didn't give them arrest power. But that's still more of our tax dollars, that's going to go into hiring somebody that don't know squat and is going to say, I see an irregularity, and then they're going to call the police. And then it's just, why don't they just want us to vote? Okay,
y'all won't vote for them. That's why. let me ask real before I go to President Anthony Brown. Let me just ask. So we have our public defender on the phone. So does that mean his office will be on high alert when this bill kicks off? And then what does he do as far as, how does that work for his office? I know, Mr. Weeks, are you available?
I am available. And first, I'd like to thank the NAACP for all the presidents, our state president, and our local president, for all the work that you're doing to address this issue, to bring attention to this issue, to discuss this issue. This is the most pressing issue that is facing us as citizens and us as people in this community to ensure that we have a voice and a right to vote. You know, we are always monitoring the legislative session and recognizing that the net is being cast as wide as possible to make sure that folks are being brought into this criminal justice process. My understanding of the legislation that it may not trigger immediate arrest, but after investigation, and if that does lead to arrest, then of course, if the person is found to be indigent, we will represent them if the matter is brought here in Broward County. That is still yet to be laid out. And that's why it's of great concern. When you start introducing criminal investigations into an election process on a ground level, what you are attempting to do is to stoke fear in the electorate, to stoke fear in the community. So folks will question whether they are going to actually go to the polls. This is purely calculated. They know exactly what they're trying to do. They know the message that they are trying to send to certain communities. And we have to recognize that our right to vote is sacred. It's something that we have to fight for every single day. And we cannot be intimidated as a people. We still have to gather and go to the polls. And that's why it's so important to have leaders in the community like the NAACP that took this issue to court. You know, the courts are so important when it comes to a rogue legislature and a rogue governor that is trying to follow through on their own political interests. And that's why you have to have civil rights organizations that have a history of taking it to the court and making sure that the court intervenes. And this particular judge sent a very clear message by putting the legislature on probation for 10 years. That is an incredible use of his power because he recognized how ill-advised this governor and this legislature is being directed to use their power to undermine the people's will and their voice in voting. So I appreciate you. I won't take up any more time. You know, I'm always here. I'm always listening. And I too, as a community member, am learning from all of you incredibly gifted folks that we have leading this fight. So thank you both, and thank you all.
And let me just ask you one quick question, Mr. Weeks. So I know that you participate in the public defenders have a statewide organization. Is there any chatter among your group about what to do and how to be prepared for when this does go into effect?
Yes, ma'am. We are always monitoring it. And as this matures and this office is in place and some more directive is given as to their policy procedure and things of that sort, we will be able to better position ourselves to be prepared to deal with the onslaught of the utilization. We are hoping that, you know, in due time, there will be some new elections that come, and there will be some new folks that will be entering in, and that there will be some new will from the people that will put new folks in positions of authority that will maybe change the arc of where this is going and maybe revisit some of this stuff to unravel some of this wicked web that they have tried to weave.
From your mouth to God's ears. Let me move on to President Brown. So when the state conference agrees, we talk to Pamela comes forth and she has this issue that we must weigh in. She then goes to on to our president, and then once the word has been given to our general counsel, and then we're all in. But then we need NAACP peers to stand up and give testimony, and then there's tons of prep time. There's tons of conversations with Pamela. There's conversations with, as always, a whole bunch of lawyers. And for here, I'm fortunate that I also have Judge Holmes to fall upon. But the person one of the two people who stepped up for this SB 90, Senate Bill 90, is here, and that is President Brown. So if you can tell us a little bit about your experience as you moved to give testimony in this federal trial here that you had.
Thank you, President Ellison. I'm truly humbled and honored to be among all of you. And first and foremost, I give honor to God because I thank him for allowing me to use me for the building of his kingdom. And this is one of the journeys. And if you would indulge me, I cannot move forward without giving acclimates to my hero, to an icon in the Indian River County NAACP family, my mentor, my hero, a man that put me on the path of civic engagement, civic advocacy, the one and only Victor Hart Sr., who just celebrated his 90th birthday. He gave 40 plus years to being president of this branch. He's given over 60 years to the association from the national, regional, and state level. And also with him were two other mentors in my life, the late Coach Bill Wilson II and Mr. Merrill Russ. As I prepared for this, I was asked to do it, and it was kind of like I didn't even realize what I was doing. And it was important when Pamela told me that she recommended me. Pamela and I had acquired a relationship prior to this through Marsha. Marsha turned me on to Pamela, and we acquired a relationship. So when Pamela said, well, Tony, I recommended you. Okay, I got to show Pamela I can handle business, but still not understanding what I was doing. She set me up with some awesome young attorneys, Amaya Trigg, Ellen Choi, Mahogany Reed, Virginia Wilson, Cheryl, and Ramon. And not only them, but then I had to turn to Marsha because Marsha had rode this horse before. It was a horse I had never ridden. And she was always 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I could engage Marsha to not only give me information and knowledge, but to let me know, hey, dude, you can handle this. You know, you can do it. And I think between her and Pamela, I didn't, you know, I thought I was the second coming because they were always saying, you can handle this. And in that process, I had some branch people, Dr. Elizabeth Jackson, my civic engagement chair, Stephen Dean, my press and communications chair, Raquel Wright, my branch secretary and assistant state secretary, and Sean Kinsey, this Florida State Conference secretary. When I needed information for those lawyers, all I had to do was call. And Pamela said, wow, y'all don't mess around with the documentation. So it was relevant that all of these people were supporting me, but I still did not realize what I was doing. In the process of these 90 plus hours, you know, I didn't even think about it. I was just doing it. It was as if I was in robotic mode. And I guess Pamela would sit on the sidelines on the Zoom meetings, prep sessions, and she would be analyzing this and watching me. So one day, she's already alluded to, and you did as well, Judge Holmes. She said, Tony, you have all the knowledge, you have the data. She said, but you're dealing with white men who don't have a clue. She said, I need you to take all of that and tell a story. That was pivotal in my approach to what I was doing, because now I understood I must go into that room and tell these people how we perceive and the nuances associated with our dealing with this corrupt system in the state of Florida. And in that process, I had to reach again to Marsha because there was trickery. Pamela told me there was trickery, Amaya, and I can never thank Pamela enough for that group of lawyers, and they were all young. And Amaya, she was just awesome. They would allow me to understand the little nuances where the state would try to set me up so that they could undermine my credibility. And one night in particular, I would continuously say branches. How many branches you got? And Marsha schooled me. She said, they setting you up. She said, because there may be 61 branches, but we don't look at it like that. She said, there are 122 units. That's your branches, your school branches, your college youth, all of the above. And if you say, oh, we got 61 branches, then Mr. Brown, you really don't know your organization. So in that moment, Marsha gave me knowledge that would not allow my credibility to be undermined. And so as I moved forward, we went to the depositions, and I mean, it was a knockdown drag out with their lawyer, but he got so mad with me, he didn't know what to do. and Judge Holmes, you alluded to it. One of the things I kept on the table, impoverished, under-resourced communities of color. Impoverished, under-resourced communities of color. And I wanted it to resonate in their thought process. We're not you. It's not check the box. It's not that easy. We got to teach, we got to persuade, we got to hog tie, we got to do whatever's necessary to get our people, first and foremost, to trust the system. And then secondly, to participate in the system. And third, to vote. So it was a continuous battle. I was surrounded by great people. I was surrounded by people that enhanced my ability. And so when we went to court, well, during the process, there were little different things that would show up. And I can laugh with Pamela because she did something. There was an advocacy letter that we didn't have a clue, where we really didn't think they were going to let in. It's a letter Pamela wrote to the Florida Senate. And it was defining how we felt about the adverse effect that SB 90 would have on us as a people. So there was a curveball thrown, and you know, Amaya and Pamela, they realized, oh, Tony can hit a curve, we'll just throw it anyway. So they said, we don't think it's gonna get in. They're gonna object. Sure enough, we get into court and Amaya throws it on the table. The judge said, objection from the state, objection. So the Amaya continued. So the judge said, okay, we'll just use it for informational purposes. And so I explained what the advocacy letters was and whatever. State was just continuously objecting. So the judge called this clerk up and whispered something to him. The clerk left. And so Amaya wanted me to explain how I interpreted the disadvantages this SB 90 had in the advocacy letter and how it explained it. And a few minutes later, the clerk came back and whispered to the judge. The judge said, oh, initially I was going to use it for informational purposes. He said, nah, I got case law. So a letter that we didn't have a clue that would get in, got in. And these were the things that these lawyers, this group of lawyers and Pamela and all of those who supported me would allow me to go in there confidently and just assert myself as if I knew it all, but I had a whole army behind me, you know, and Pamela, you got this, Amaya, we're not worried about you. And I guess Pamela understood me to a degree. All but one, I had 7 people in my ear. All of them but one were females, and they were young, and they were women of color. But the one male, he just sat, Ramon. He just sat and he sat and he sat. And I think when he saw that in those final moments when I was conflicted, he spoke. Out of all those sessions, over 90 hours, not including Marsha time and other people time, but those 90 hours of prep, he spoke one time. And he said, Mr. Brown, you got this. And to me, it meant the world that he sat there and at that opportune moment, he said, you got this. So I was honored, I was proud. I called Marsha and I called Pamela and Amaya after it happened because I collapsed when the judge, well, I'll add in, Pamela may tell you, after my testimony, the state of Florida refused to question me. And then the Miami attorney asked me 2 questions and they was really stupid. And then Judge Walker said, Ms. Attorney Triggs, I want to commend you and your witness for the excellent job you did by going to the point, establishing factors and doing your job. So when the judge said, Mr. Brown, you dismissed, I just basically collapsed because, and I started calling Pamela and everybody, what just happened? I had no idea, ladies and gentlemen, of what that had transpired. And I talked to a preacher friend and I said, what did I do? I don't have a clue. He said, Tony, God needed you to be in that mindset because if you knew what you were doing, you'd have made it about you. So in that moment, it was about Florida. It was about the Florida State Conference of the NAACP. It was about Pamela, Amaya, all those lawyers, Marsha, all those people who trusted and believed in me that I was the one. And with that being said, I thank the NAACP, Florida State Conference, Madam President, I thank Pamela for believing in me and trusting me. And I thank all of those who supported me. And Pamela, know I kind of got emotional when she informed me. Marsha was so elated. I know, she was on top of the world, but when she said, call Pamela, call Pamela. So I called Pamela, and that's when it dawned on me what had really transpired. She said, Tony, you represented the entire state of Florida. And that was impactful. And like I said earlier, thank you, Florida State Conference. Thank you, everybody who was a part of this journey. And as Marsha say, we won one.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And so, as part of this, making it plain. So, we've heard all the legal jargon, and the judge said this, and the lawyer said this. So, both to Pamela and to Judge Holmes. So, you have on here Indian River County, Okaloosa County, Central Brevard, Miami-Dade, South-Dade, Lake Wales, Seminole County, Hillsborough County, Lee County, and of course, Broward County. So, can tell us, where do we go from here? So, as we sit today, the rules, if we're going to register folk on tomorrow, what should we know? And then, if obviously the order for the governor's team said they're going to appeal. So, what does that mean as we move along to register voters in our current space? And then, when they have questions about the drop boxes, and do they need to re-up, or how is this going to affect us as we move along and do our work?
Pamela, I'm going to let you go first. I have some thoughts, but you're the expert on the Hill. You're on mute.
The governor has indeed said he was going to appeal this ruling by Judge Walker, and we have every reason to expect that he will. The first thing that's going to happen is that they will probably request a stay from the 11th Circuit. In other words, just hold this order in abeyance and let things move forward as they currently stand in Senate Bill 90. So we don't know what the 11th Circuit is going to do, but we do expect the act to be appealed. What we are most hopeful for is that there won't be a stay in place, and that this act will be held in abeyance long enough for us to get through the 2022 elections in August and November. That would be our best hope. But as it stands with the law itself, if it doesn't engage a stay, the one thing we have to realize is that several provisions were held unconstitutional and violations of federal law, but there were no orders in the judicial order. The judge didn't order anybody to do anything. We know that supervisors of elections still have discretion in the numbers of drop boxes they use and the placement of those drop boxes. So it is going to still be incumbent upon us to be with those supervisors of elections, encouraging them to do at least what they did in 2020, if not more. There is nothing in this act that requires them to have the same numbers and placements of drop boxes, for example, that they did before, because that was mostly a discretionary act, other than where the law basically says you have to locate them. So some supervisors will probably return to the successful process they used in 2020, and some of them may be somewhat reluctant to do so. So we cannot yield and slow down on our constant engagement with our supervisors of elections.
I somewhat agree. I'm thinking, based upon past actions of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, that they will issue a stay. And we've got elections in August, judicial elections, judges and everything. The governor's up, he's running for his office. So, but I think in them issuing a stay, it may mean that they're going to do a quick work as they did with the mask mandate. That doesn't bode too well for us if they quickly rule. And they don't mind reversing Judge Walker. As a matter of fact, Judge Walker, in his opinion, said, I've handled 17 of these types of cases. And I've ruled for the state 6 times in those cases. And one of those times, they didn't even appeal me when I ruled against them. So he charted out his experience with handling these voter suppression type cases. But I think there's going to be a stay. But if there's not, I'm a firm believer in Romans 4:15, where there is no law, there is no transgression. And I'll be right there in Mr. Joe Scott's ear saying, look, let's do what you did in 2020. It worked, it was fine. And until the 11th rules, let's just go on. It's as if we don't have a provision there because Judge Walker said it was unconstitutional. So I'll be there making my petition to the supervisors of election for my county. But I just think, as Pamela said, if I may call you Pamela, Miss Burch Fort, I do have a lot of respect for you. I really do. But know your supervisor of elections. I believe a few of you, some of the unit presidents, had the supervisors of elections, according to Judge Walker's order. You actually had them to come out and speak. I know my unit president, we had a forum where he was on and saying something. So I will certainly be working very closely with my unit president and to make sure that Broward is covered, and you all do likewise with your respective counties. Just think about what Dr. King said. Denying us the right to vote is like telling a Christian, don't pray. And prayer got us here. To those who don't believe, you don't have to believe, just bear with us. But we fast and pray. That's what got us here, and we're going to continue to do that. We need your help. We need your assistance. Join the NAACP. President Adora made that appeal early, and sometimes people come to church late, so they don't have to do the offering, but we're going to open the doors of the church and do it again. It's offering time. So thank you, Madam President Ellison.
Somewhere I read it's faith without works is dead. So we're going to talk about the work here. So Pamela, you have 10 branches of the NAACP on here. You have representatives from Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, the Order of the Eastern Star, Golden Victor number 4, the FAMU Alumni Association. All of us are pretty much third parties, and certainly. So if we're going to be registering, the president has said to us, if you're not going to do voter registration, turn in your charter. You've got to do voter registration. And so what are the rules that we are going to be following, that we must follow if we're going to go out and register voters on tomorrow?
Well, there are, there aren't any new forms yet. This law is not effective yet, but it is coming. So you would be using the rules of registration that existed in 2020 going forward, because 524 is not yet settled law. The one thing that you would have to be careful about, you would not have to give the verbal disclaimer. That is part of Judge Walker's orders. And I assume that the registration forms with the printed is not on there yet, simply because this law is not in effect. You would really need to be cautious about delivering completed voter application forms, because now the fine moves from $1,000 to $50,000. And we truly believe that there will be legions of people diligently checking, not necessarily employees of a supervisor of elections office, but we know that some of these private election police will be sent out by the Republican Party to check to see what's happening in the supervisor's office with the arrival of the forms. We've had several people around the state arrested recently for voter fraud, and amazingly, the numbers of those folks were found when some of these, well, I call them private election police, simply go to supervisors of elections offices and start digging around in files. So we can expect a lot of that to occur. But you'd basically be registering under the 2020 rules.
Which means make sure we turn the voter registration card in prior to 14 days, on or before 14 days.
Correct.
Make sure that we're not adding anything extra onto the form. Let those and the voter fill out their own form, and make sure you have trained people that are out there. You make sure that we are registered with this. I think all units have a third party number, but we need to brush up on the rules. It's on the web, Supervisor of Elections website to make sure, the state elections website, to make sure that we know the rules. But there is no excuse for us not to register voters. The president simply ain't gonna have it. And so in now the drop boxes, as we are, well, let me ask you this: is there a good probability that our election is on August 23rd? Is there a good probability that the governor will be able to speed through to the 11th and it will affect what we do on August 23rd?
Oh, that's possible, especially if there's a stay in place. That would be immediate. It would put this act, the order in abeyance. But as Judge Holmes indicated, the court could put this on a fast track in an effort to try and render a decision by August. Um, it is a conservative court. It could very well slow walk it because having a stay in place would be to the governor's advantage. We would be voting, on his 2020 Senate Bill 90. So we just don't know what the court is going to do. We'll probably know within the next, 15 days or so as to whether they're going to request a stay and whether the 11th Circuit will grant.
And so I understand our supervisor of elections. When the news broke and the articles were printed, I immediately sent it to our supervisor of elections and deputy supervisor of elections, and they were at a conference, so they were briefed on the ruling. Generally, what happens is we have 67 counties and 67 supervisor of elections who all operate in their own bubble, and it's different. So we just have to know what the law is and then continue on doing the right thing. And if and when there is a stay, will we get something immediately, Pamela, that you'll work with us to put the directive out and the changes in direction for us, whatever the new rules are. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I think as bad as SB 90 was, I wanna make sure that people know that it was worse when it was first proposed. So Pamela worked with the state legislators to make sure to get out as much as she could. And can you talk a little bit about the battle that you fight when you are at the Capitol, working on our behalf and dealing with these folks, trying to, knowing that you're will be outvoted, but how do you work with these folk to make sure that it's not as bad as initially proposed?
Well, Madam President, the first thing I do is eat an enormous amount of chocolate. That's my secret weapon for being able to sustain some of the activities at the Florida legislature. I have to say, people have asked, what happened this legislative session? How was the session is generally the question. And it was the most horrendous. It was grotesque. And I often say it was extremely emotional. The balance of our legislature is such that the majority party has really gotten to a position of thinking it can do what it wants to do, when it wants to do it, and how it wants to do it. And it has been cruel the way they engage legislation. This particular session, we had citizens removed from committee meetings when they tried to address issues at the podium. We had citizens who have been banned from entering the Capitol complex for a year simply because of their advocacy. And we actually had a representative of Planned Parenthood of Florida placed under arrest for her advocacy this session. So it is and can be very difficult when we have these bills filed with just very suppressive measures, aggressive measures that harm our community. And I am pleased to say that I work very hard on creating relationships with lawmakers who serve our communities. Most of those individuals are members of the Black Caucus, and they know their communities. They know what's harmful to their communities, and they always have stepped up to help me advocate on behalf of the NAACP. I spend time explaining our positions to them. I put that position in writing for them, and then I give them bullet points, talking points about that position so that they have the opportunity to put this information in the record. And that is one thing that the NAACP has done extremely well over the last few years. Madam President, when she allows me to get into a fight, I always say, now, you know, I'm going to want to do the right thing here. And so she has allowed me the pleasure of writing letters, some over my signature, some over her signature, some over the national president's signature. So we're submitting written letters, written requests to legislative leadership and to committee members who are voting on these provisions. I'm testifying in committee about the impact on our communities. And it takes all of that to tamp down some of this heinous activity. We also work with a very broad progressive voting rights coalition. And we've all gotten to know our strengths very well, and we lean to that strength. And collectively, we have had positive impact in removing some of the more heinous provisions of both of these bills. So as bad as they are much improved by the time they get to the governor's desk. If you recall with SB 90, you couldn't give anything at the polling lines. Everything was eliminated. We had no drop boxes. And it was just outrageous that the legislature would propose these types of provisions. So with help from our coalition, from help from our Black Caucus members and our Democratic coalition, we have had some success in improving legislation. But of course, our best success has been when we take this into the courts and lay our case out before our judges.
And Pamela, if I could, let me ask you, so line warming is a big thing for us. And so we should be planning what we call our souls to the polls. Some people call it rally at the polls. And I think the rule is proposed that's on the table that may or may not be stayed. It's 150 feet from the front door of the venue.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so we couldn't walk over to the line unless it extended past that 150 feet.
That is correct.
But those voters could then walk over to us.
Yes, voters could come to you, but you couldn't go to them beyond the 150 breaker mark.
Okay, so it looks like we should be in the mode to be getting ready for Souls to the Polls for our usual places, and we do this all over the state. Some depending on what kind of setups they are during early voting, and then certainly on election day. And so we want to encourage our units to get ready. If something's going to jump out, even if you can't, they can either come to us or we can go to them. One of the ways we're going to be able to take care of our people is what you're saying.
That's correct. That is correct. And so there's so much to do to get ready for this next election, and a lot of it is not just the law, but just the confusion around the law. We passed Senate Bill 90. We've now got this judicial order. Will we have a stay? What happens when bill from this year, 524, is enacted? And the majority of this is confusing our voters, and that is a very intentional strategy. So we are going to have to dig deep, much like we did in preparation for the 2020 election, and find out the magic ways to talk about this in our community. We did an extraordinary job in 2020 in that the vote by mail ballot was more successful than it ever had been before, and our use of the drop boxes in an effort to get people to understand you don't have to stand in line. But it took a lot of effort to refine those messages to deliver to our communities. And with all of this confusion that has ensued, it's going to be difficult for us. And mind you, we're still struggling with the confusion around what's known as Amendment 4. As you know, President Ellison, since you were so intricate to that case, um, who's paid the fees and when they paid them and where they paid them is still an issue because jurisdictions still don't know that information. For many returning citizens is just not available. And that too is going to be confusing when you are trying to determine, can you register that person to vote?
So if I'm a returning citizen and I don't know if my fines and fees have been paid, then what is my best course of action?
Going on a hunt with that individual. It still puts that individual at jeopardy should he register to vote and not be eligible. And the clerk may not be able to determine that in a reasonable period of time. We are still having those issues.
But the good thing, and NAACP, we were peripherally involved with one to get that person, that individual, in front of a judge. And the judge can waive if the clerk can't find out how much they owe, and even if they find out how much they owe, and they don't have an ability to pay, and will never be able to pay, the judge is able to waive under the statute whatever that person owes. And Madam President, I don't know if you remember the very first case that it happened in Broward County. So, and I know Mr. Weeks in Broward, he helps out a great deal by pulling files and we go through them. But every county's not set up for that. But there's people that will pay the cost and the fees if they know. But if they can't, the best thing to do is get that hearing in front of a judge and have the judge waive so that the person can, and the way the order reads is that it is restoration of rights for the ability to vote. Okay, so we have a mechanism here. So Madam President, maybe we can go on the road and show the others.
And as you indicated, not every jurisdiction functions the same, but just as our branches develop relationships with our supervisors of elections, I encourage them to also develop relationships with the chief judge in that jurisdiction, because that judge is the one that will decide whether they're going to set up the mechanism to do the judicial waivers. And sometimes it's a matter of a conversation and explaining and impressing upon that chief judge the need to convene these hearings instantaneously in his or her jurisdiction.
Thank you. So we're going to begin to wrap up. I want to go to Mr. Tony Brown for his wrap up. And you have 1 minute, Mr. Tony Brown.
I just once again want to thank everybody for allowing me to be a part of this historical event. I hope that this will show our people that the NAACP Florida State Conference is not a paper tiger, and that your participation in the process is mandatory. Join, be at the table. As a friend of mine told me, if you're not at the table, you're the menu. And I continue to say, God bless the Florida State Conference.
Thank you so much. Judge Holmes.
Join us. People have asked, how can I help? Patty Lynn, thank you. You're already a member, but get others to join us in this struggle because it's going to be a fight. So thank you all for allowing me. Madam President Ellison, thank you so much for allowing me to work with you and the NAACP. Much appreciated.
And our own strategist extraordinaire, Pamela Burch Fort.
Thank you, Madam President, and to President Wiese, thank you both for, again, allowing me the pleasure of doing what I do for this organization. And Judge Holmes and Mr. Brown, it's always a pleasure to be in the same room with the two of you. Madam President, I'd like to end by reading a passage from Judge Walker's order. He states, in Florida, white Floridians outpace Black Floridians in almost every socioeconomic metric. In Florida, since the end of the Civil War, politicians have attacked the political rights of Black citizens. In Florida, though we have come far, the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go.
Thank you, Pamela. And not last but not least, our own president, Dr. Adora Obienweze. Unmute, please. That's it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much. Let me say that I want to first commend you, Madam President Ellison, for putting this together as you always put it together, and it is well put together. The information that was shared with our audience was phenomenal. If you could have read the comments as they came in, they were the top of the hill. And there was not one comment that did not commend the information that was shared. People were just hungry to know about what you meant and how did that impact upon them. So I just want to thank you for doing this. And then to have our guests that we have, somebody's writing now and sending up awesome job panelists. And a lot of comments have come in about the panelists, but we know, those of us who work with the panelists know that they are the top of the hill with what they do. So thank you so much, Judge. Thank you so much, Attorney Pamela. Just can't begin to tell you how much we appreciate you, need you. And quite frankly, if we could clone you, that's what my teacher used to say, if we clone you all, we'd really have something. But just know that you are appreciated and that we do work very hard in the state of Florida. I know you may have some idea about it, but there are many units that work very hard. And of course, President Ellison certainly provides leadership in how to address this. What she's done tonight will certainly open up the doors for the other units that are watching. And I know that because some of their names have popped up. And I'd like to thank President Brown. That's very, very important work that he's done. And of course, I want you to know that he works like that. Now, he didn't tell anybody about how he has brought me up to where he lives and said I had to do some work there with him. So President Brown, you know that you can always count on me, and certainly all of us, because we know that it's going to take all of us, and it does take all of us, no matter if the case seems simple to somebody. Well, when you look at the case and look at it real good from the eyes of the attorneys that work with us, you certainly will understand that you are going to get out of it what you put in it. So we've got to make sure that we put into what our lawyers are advising us to do so we continue to get the best. I really believe that. And of course, you all know that. We really have to have what we have in the top of the line lawyers. So thank each one of you so very much. And I'd like to certainly invite you to don't leave us now. We need a lot more of these sessions. The entire state conference needs it. So thank you again and again, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam President. And I ask that we all remember that the National Association for the Advancement of Color People, referred to as the NAACP or the association, was founded on the beliefs embodied in the Constitution of the United States of America. We support democracy, dignity, and freedom. Members of the NAACP, in keeping with the charge of our founders, stand against all forms of injustice. The United States of America, built by us all, belongs to all of us. The repayment for our labor is equity and justice for all. The NAACP will continue to fight for justice until all, without regard to race, gender, creed, or religion, enjoy equal status. That is the preamble of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And that is why we do what we do every single day. I certainly want to thank our panelists, Madam President, for allowing us to continue this work. And we want to make sure we encourage others, those who may not be members, to make sure you join the fight for freedom. There is, in every branch where there's plenty of work to be done. The only thing that's missing from the struggle is you, and you and more like you. And so we will close out with prayer as we always do. We encourage all of us. I see there's a message from our special counsel. The Florida State Conference and its lawyers did an amazing job with the highly dense, critical, and consequential civil rights case, and that is true. And we probably, I would venture to say that Pamela Burch Fort didn't get, and I know that there's other lawyers and there's all that kind of stuff, but for us, she is the lawyer that we call, because when it's important that when you have someone that no question seems small or unimportant, or you're going to feel like you're talking to a professional, certainly, but a friend as well. So she will understand when you ask that question, rather than somebody else who may not understand, or you may not be comfortable asking, but you really need to know the information. And so most of us, it was first time testifying in giving federal trials or depositions, and it was a big deal. And so we, in addition to praying, I think our blessings were Judge Holmes and Attorney Pamela Burch to make sure that we understand. And let me just say this, don't let the smooth taste fool you with Attorney Pamela Burch Fort. She was like, Marsha, you go in there and you tell them about this discrimination. You tell them, and so, that's what we needed to know to make sure you were ready to go, because they came, the attorneys, the state, their attorneys came hard, and they tried to discredit us, but we were ready and armed with the truth, and certainly with the encouragement to do so. And so we thank you all, and happy birthday again to our president, Dr. Dori Obianweze. And Judge, if you will close us out with prayer, please.
Thank you again, Madam President Ellison. Father, we thank you for the information that we have received tonight. God, we thank you for each panelist. We thank you for our state president. I thank you personally, God, for my branch unit president. I thank you for all the people who are on here who are going to run with the vision. And God, I just thank you for giving us the assurance that the battle is not ours, but it's the Lord. So we're going to look to you. We look to the hills from which cometh our help, because our help comes from you who made heaven and earth. Go with us, stand by us, be with us forever, and we'll give you the glory and the praise. And we thank you now in advance for all the victory that you're pulling us through. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all. Good night. Peace and power.